series, today featuring author Leib Epstein, reading from and discussing the Goldkorn Variations, a trilogy. Thank you for joining Brookline Booksmith in this celebratory event today. If you're familiar with our store, welcome back. If this is the first time you're hearing about us, welcome. We're an independent bookstore located in Brookline, Massachusetts, and it is thanks to readers like you that we have been in operation since 1961. Thank you for being a part of our community today and for making us your independent bookstore with your attendance and your book purchases. If you have any questions for our author tonight, please email them to Lisa, L-I-S-A, at brooklinebooksmith.com. You can find this email address in the description below this video. Tonight, we welcome back to the event series author Leib Epstein. Leib Epstein is an award-winning author who has written 12 books of fiction, including the celebrated novels San Remo Drive and King of the Jews, and his most recent, Hill of Beans, a novel of war and celluloid, a chronicle of the making of Casablanca, for which his father Philip and Uncle Julius were the screenwriters. He teaches at Boston University, where he directed the creative writing program for 36 years. We celebrate with him the release of the Goldkorn Variations, which collects in one definitive volume with a new afterword by the author, 3 previously published novels, originally from E.P. Dutton and Norton Presses, about an aged European flautist, his music and his loves, from childhood to age 104. Epstein introduced Leib Goldkorn in his novella, The Steinway Quintet, which received the American Academy of Arts and Letters Award for Distinguished Achievement in Literature, and which later became one of the 3 tales collected in the first of these volumes. That in turn spawned the craze known worldwide as Goldkorniana, the illustration by Pablo Picasso, Scène Erotique, from 1962, appearing on the cover of the Goldkorn Variations, courtesy of the estate of Pablo Picasso, Artist Rights Society, and the Pace Gallery, is one which the author, Leib Epstein, feels particularly captures the undying energy of a man who never seems to grow old. In that sense, perhaps, Leib Goldkorn is like Picasso himself. Here we both welcome and bid farewell to this spectacular figure, and to begin the festivities, please join me in welcoming Leib Epstein. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you to the Booksmith for having me once again. Everybody should know about the Booksmith. It's a wonderful institution in our town. It's been there long before we moved to Brookline in 1978. And they're not only a fine bookstore, they're wonderful citizens of our community. I'm broadcasting from the Brookline Teen Center, and a couple of members of the Teen Center are going to come on camera now. Here they are. This is son Paul, and this is Leib Goldkorn. And now get out of here.
Okay.
And I mention the Teen Center because it's one of the places to which the Booksmith has been so generous and continues to be so generous, and we really appreciate it. I'm going to start. I would also like to thank my publishers and editors, Julie Nemroff and Lisa Nemroff, who right from the start got into the spirit of this project and who saw it through to publication with enormous care and dedication and daring. I don't think there's another publisher in the country, Picasso or not, who would have this cover on this really beautiful book that they put out. I'm going to begin reading from an afterword. There are the 3 books that are collected here and 2 essays. One of them is an afterword. I'll just read a couple pages from it to explain to you the origins of Leib Goldkorn. Off I went from Los Angeles east to college in the fall of 1956. I flew alone in a plane with 4 propellers, my first time in the air. Somewhere over the Rockies, I kept hearing bangs and thuds and felt a slight shiver through the fuselage. I looked out the window. Chunks of ice, the size of hams, were breaking off the wings, tumbling inches from my pale, pinched face and striking the aluminum shell that could only be an inch or two thick. But the stewardess, I don't know what they call them now, administrative assistants, kept up with her grim painted smile and her tray of assorted drinks. For comfort, I rehearsed my mantra. This was a series of farewell instructions given to me by my Uncle Julie, who replaced, identically, my father, who had died 4 years before. 1. Marry a rich girl and sleep till 12. 2. Once in New Haven, go to Fen Feinstein and buy an overcoat. 3. Never butter your bread without tearing it in two. 4. When you get to New York, go to Ratner's and order the mushroom and barley soup. Onion rolls are free. As it happens, I fulfilled all these injunctions, save for the first. As for the last, I showed up on 2nd Avenue during the initial Christmas break of my bright college years. The large room was warm, the window glass opaque with the breath of many eaters. I shuffled out of my overcoat, a rusty brown thing with hairs I can still feel against my skin. Fen and Feinstein, too, had found their mark, and unwound my blue and white muffler. I hung both on the back of my chair and opened the menu. The soup was there, all right, and somehow, perhaps by some cabalistic twist, the rolls were already on the table. Now I will tell you how my meal at Ratner's began. From some impish motive, or a mild act of rebellion, I let my eyes drift away from the selection of soups to other items on the menu. I motioned to the waiter, who was no youngster. When a quarter of an hour later he arrived, I put my finger on 4 unknown syllables. What's this here Mama Liga? The gentleman, tall and gaunt, looked down at the seated young Yaley, at the fedora I had forgotten to remove, at my blue blazer with its rows of brass buttons, and at my unlit freshman pipe. Not for you, he replied. So I had the mushroom and barley, and can report these 66 years later that, with the possible exception of the marinated herring at the Hillcrest Country Club, this was the one gastronomic experience that exceeded several varieties of sexual intercourse. I'm going to skip a few paragraphs and pick up a page or two later. I'm drifting far from 111 2nd Avenue, from which, fully sated, I departed in December 1956. Fade out. Fade in 20 years later, and many onion rolls later. This is when I read in the New York Times that Ratner's was about to close. What about those waiters? I thought. It may have been only a day or two later that on the keyboard of my L.C. Smith in Corona, I began to try to find the answer. True, the establishment I came up with was on Rivington Street and not 2nd Avenue. Was Fleischig, those Romanian broilings, and not Milchig, and had a string quintet. But the waiters, Mosk, Margolis, Ellenbogen, were very much the same. The finished story, printed in Antaeus and then in a book, the Steinway Quintet +4, was collected in the Best American Short Stories of 1977, won me a prize for distinction in literature from the American Academy and Institute of Arts and Letters. Thank you, John Cheever. And in general, created a bit of a stir. And that, I thought, was that. It was not. I don't know why. Perhaps because I wanted to prove that the world of Ratner's was for me, and that Mama Liga was my Mama Lotion after all. But I never stopped thinking of those waiters, both their lives and their fate. So I wrote 2 more stories set on Rivington Street near Allen, and published them in the first of the books that make up the volume Goldkorn Tales. Make up this volume, Goldkorn Tales. It did well enough, even appearing as Historianos de Goldkorn in Portuguese. They loved Leib in Lisbon. But that wasn't that either. it seemed I loved Leib as well. I began what I thought was a pattern, a long, supposedly major book full of historical fiction, Holocaust for King of the Jews, the Modoc Indian Wars with Pinto and Sons, Mussolini with Eighth Wonder of the World. And the point I go on to make is that I thought these were the important things I was writing, and that the Goldkorn tales were sort of a playful thread running through my career. But with the publication of this book and looking backward, I think I know that the thread was the other things, and that the pearls on this necklace belong to Leib Goldkorn and his tales. So that's there's more in the afterword, but you can read it for yourselves if you like. And now, by international popular demand, I'm going to read the Ménage à Six, which is a chapter in the third volume, the Liebestod. Leib is called back to his hometown, Jihlava, in the Czech Republic. It was Czechoslovakia when he went there, to be an honorary Jew, because he's the last living Jew who was born there before the Holocaust. I think otherwise the story is pretty self-contained. Friends, Leib Goldkorn speaking. Though I can hardly believe myself the miraculous events I'm about to relate. They took place on the night of my 104th birthday in my birthplace of Iglau, now in the Czech Republic, the town of Jihlava. Yes, in my old boyhood home, in my bedroom, and on the taffeta-covered bed of my youth. Also sleeping within the walls of number 5 Lindenstrasse, the following personages. My cousin Zipporah, the Rebbetzin, that is, wife to a rabbi, Josefina, the Brazilian bombshell, no more than age 30, and Abdi, the rabbi's son, a muscular mesomorph with the defect of a lisp. Also, Miss Iveta Kramzovatna, deputy mayor, town of Jihlava, for culture, entertainment, and sports. On the thin side, jasmine perfume. Last, my feline friend, Hymena, a three-legged cat, green-eyed and red, with a general appearance of a brush that is used to clean bottles. Let us return to the midnight hour. I had been asleep and dreaming, as is the wont of old men, of pretty little pigtailed things. I was awakened by a rustle and a creak at my door. I, in my nightdress, sat up, pushing through the crack a slippered foot and 5 plump fingers of a hand. Zipporah, the Rebbetzin, tiptoeing into my chamber. As the full figure drew closer, I calmly addressed her. Begone, madam, you are but a dream, a fig leaf of fancy. She did not vanish. She came toward me, speaking thus. Oh, dear man, look at you, such a nightcap with a ball at the end. Still I resisted. Madam, Leib Goldkorn cannot be fooled by such a will-o'-the-wisp. Be off, to horse. But she did not go off. Instead, in her tent-like kaftan, she drew closer. Permission, if you please, to sit, sir? She pointed to a corner of my feather-filled mattress. I nodded. Cousin Goldkorn, I have for you certain feelings. Look, I will show them to you. And with that, she pulled both half of her robes aside. Like many a youth, I took much interest in the operations of the Deutsche Luftschifffahrt AG, particularly the LZ-4, which I once saw sailing over the Bohemian Moravian Heights, and the LC-3, the Victoria Louise, named for the Duchess of Brunswick. who, with her high waist and hair in a bun, was not for the lads of Iglau, was for the lads of Iglau a hot ticket. What the spouse of Rabbi Yitzhak ben Kaspar did when she offered to show me her feelings was to release from the hanger of her opened kaftan 2 such zeppelins, which in the windless atmosphere hung motionless before my gaping eyes. It was on this very bed and on that very spot that my mother, Falma, had perched when reading to her only male child a Silesian fairy tale, or rocking him in times of illness, or on more than one occasion shedding with him a tear as she complained of the attentions shown to our housemaid by my putative pair. Herr Dr. Freud of nearby Vienna might say this was the reason I, in the grip of a primitive instinct, threw off my nightshirt and lurched forward on all fours, taking the leftward mam in my mouth and suckling there a full moment before changing objects and beginning to pursue the mam on the right. And in the dark continent stirrings. Suddenly a crash, a bang, and the door flew wide. The bombshell. Meolibi with another amante. Oh, it is not what you think. It is not what you think. Nourishment only. Water, water everywhere, you know. Not a drop to drink. No. Uttering that cry, Josephina dashed to the non-sealy and began to climb aboard. Not her, me. I know what Libby like, eh? He likes zapatos con salto, with heels. By this she meant not any old McCann, but her own 5 inchers, red with black, shiny stilettos. But the Brazilian did not allow me the pleasure of examining the buckles, the straps, or the ankle knobs trapped inside them. Instead, in an athletic maneuver, she leaped to my back, upon whose spine she began to trod. I have a hirsute shoulders. This has been from childhood an embarrassment. Que oso que cosa Melinda, the bombshell was singing the lyrics to the girl from Ipanema while doing a samba across the short ribs. Now occurred a moment that was even harder to believe. Through the open door strode the deputy mayor for culture, entertainment, and sports. Libi Milaki, it is I, your Iveta. Not only that, she was barefoot, comrades, and through the loosened top of her waistcoat, the pink eye of each modest ma'am came a winking and a peeking. Was it at that sight, or the smell of her gardenia, that my Jewish-style member decided to explore the world outside its S-Klein drawers? What happened next was the sort of event one finds in the rearmost pages of R.F. von Krafft-Ebing. There one might read of the man who drank his own urine, or of another man of the upper classes who achieved transports with a rope. Prepare yourself, friends. The Kromzovatna joined the jamboree. Without hesitation, she began to slide across the mattress on her back to where I remained on my hands and knees. With skill, she maneuvered downward and still further downward until she lay with her head between my sirloins. Then, opening her mouth, she took all 80 centimeters of Pan Johnson inside it. Never in my lifetime, and almost certainly not in yours, has such a thing occurred. My feelings were mixed. On the one hand, there were in proximity teeth, molars, and bicuspids, which caused a certain alarm. On the other hand, there was a feeling of warmth and homeliness, such as a snail might experience in the safety of its shell. Glücksgefühl is what we call the sentiment in German. E la manina che verme che passa, non dolce balancio, e cammina da mar, thus sang the Brazilian beauty, while continuing to trod with heel points up and down my backside. March on, missy, le jour de gloire est arrivé. That was the Kramsovatna, who with tongue and glottis was creating a sensation of humming the Act 2 aria from The Bartered Bride. Picture in your minds Leib Goldkorn Centurion, a damsel in front, a damsel on top, and a damsel below. Might it not be said that suckling and being suckled, while the armies of Napoleon crossed and recrossed the dorsal plain, I had accomplished what many men dream of, but few achieve, the menage a quatre. Pashas amidst their harems, Mussulmen with their virgins, Mormons and their many wives, none could match in their fantasias what I had grasped in the flesh. Was this the pinnacle? Could a man aspire in the sphere of carnals any higher? Nine. Or so I thought until I heard the door to my bedroom open once again. Who was the eager visitor? A pleasant thought. Miss Esther Williams, my former handmaid and star of pagan love song, had decided to join me across the sea. Better late, madam, than never. Come with me where moonbeams light Tahitian skies, and the starlit waters linger in your eyes. Or did I dare dream? Was it Inatatuk, the Eskimo queen? Heavens, I tried to call her name, but my mouth, as described above, was full. I tried to search out her Inuit form in the dim-lit room, but the lighter-than-air ships blocked my view. I felt the goose feathers of the non-Sealy sink by the foot of the bed. Welcome aboard, stranger. I could sense the mystery woman approach from behind. Something brushed against the crupper. Ooh, a fumbling at the rectiles. Oh, so that's your game, is it? Tomfoolery. Bring it on. Just then I heard a voice, one that was not unfamiliar, declare, hold still, please, hold still. Abdi, the mesomorph. On the horizon, ladies and gentlemen, the storm of an expostulation was gathering. In the atmosphere there rose a mist of perspirations, oak moss, gardenia, and from the gentleman at my rear, shocking by Schiaparelli. Within my own body, elasticide cords, growing tighter and tighter, pulled at each joint and limb. Peppercorns were hopping on the griddle, and a spicy sauce like a mole poblano poured over my skin. Yet one thing was missing before that storm could break. Above, below, fore and aft, every inch of my body was receiving pleasure except, yes, you have guessed it, the bottoms of my feet. And no sooner did this vacuum become apparent than, with warm, soft motions against my insoles and the sandpaper swipes of a tongue, it was filled. Hymena. She had joined the hymenals. Ecstasy. From the convections in the southern hemisphere, it was clear that Pan Johnson had grown to what I believe was a personal best. The elastics were at the breaking point, the spermery at the boil. Oh, see, but see, the top of my head, with its hair horseshoe, had flown off. Oh, Moses, Oh, Abraham, Shema Israel. This is the end of that happy chapter. uh, I wish I could hear you all laughing hysterically, but I can't. I'm going to switch now to the place where all this began well more than half a century ago. The Steinway Quintet, the first story in Goldkorn Tales, the first novel in this book of 3 novels. This is what I wrote, remembering those waiters on 2nd Avenue, which I switched to Rivington Street. Good evening. My name is L. Goldkorn, and my specialty is woodwind instruments, with emphasis on the flute. However, in 1963, on the Avenue Amsterdam, my instrument was stolen from me by a green-trousered youth and has not, in spite of strong efforts, been to this day recovered. This is the reason I play at the Steinway restaurant the Bechstein piano and not the Rudel and Rose model flute with which my career began at the Imperial and Royal Hofoperntheater Orchestra. An example of my work on this instrument may be found on gramophone recordings of the NBC Orchestra, A. Toscanini conducting, in particular, the lively overture to The Secret of Susanna by E. Wolf Ferrari, in which exists for the flute a definite solo passage. I wish to say that I am an American citizen since 1943. My wife is living too. At this time, she spends most of her day in bed or on the sofa watching the television. It is rare that her health allows her to walk the 5 flights of stairs to the street. In our lives, we were blessed with a single child, a daughter, who did not upon her birth survive. Although the flute was in a case, and the case was securely under my arm, a black man took it from me and at once ran away. It was a prize upon graduation from the Académie for Music, Philosophie, and Dunsterlander Kunst when I was 14, only a boy. 1963, that is what Americans call ancient history. Let us speak of more recent events. It was at the Steinway restaurant a quiet night, a Tuesday night, raining. Only 4 tables or 5 tables occupied. The opinion of experts was that soon the rain would turn into snow. Mosk, a waiter, came to the back of the room. "You got a request," he told Salpeter, our first violinist. "Yes," Salpeter replied. "From the lady, purple dress, pearls, onion herring." This lady was a nice-looking young person, a nice dress lacking straps, her hair a mixture of red and brown. She smiled, what bright, dazzling teeth, at the quintet members. "Yes, some enchanted evening." Salpeter picked up his bow. Mermelstein, second violinist, put his instrument under his chin. Also present were Tartakauer, a flautist, and the old cellist A. Bear. For an instant there was silence. I mean, not only from the Steinway Quintet, which had not yet started to play, but from the restaurant patrons who ceased conversation, who stopped chewing food. Silence also from Margolies, Mosk, Ellenbogen, still as statues with napkins over their arms. You could not see in or out of the panes of the window because the warmth had created a mist. Around each chandelier was a circle of electrical light. Outside, on Rivington Street, on Allen Street, wet tires of cars made a sound. Shh. Salpeter dipped one shoulder forward and drew his bow over the strings. The sweet music of R. Rogers filled the room. It was during the performance of this selection that the door opened and two men, a tall Sephardic Jew and a short Jew, also of Iberian background, came in. Their hats and the cloth of their shoulders were damp. They walked through the tables to the bar, which is located directly opposite the platform where the musicians are seated. It is possible for my colleagues and me to see ourselves in the mirror of this bar while playing. Without removing their hats, the two men ordered some beer to drink. After a time, a party of four who had dined on roasted duck on famed Romanian broilings stood up, then departed. As they did so, snowflakes came in the door. The night in the crack looked dark. Mermelstein, by no means unskilled, received a specific request, September song. Of course, from Knickerbocker Holiday. When the selection came to an end, the lady in the purple dress put on a raccoon coat and with a gentleman companion went out to Rivington Street. The chimes of the first Warsaw congregation sounded 11 o'clock. The members of the Steinway Quintet had then some tea. The figs and the cakes were removed from the window. At a side table, Martinez, the cook, was eating a plate of potatoes. Tartakower smoked. The heat went off. The temperature dropped. It helped to warm clumsy fingers on the outside of a glass. At 11:15, Salpeter nodded. We began to play selections from Mr. Sigmund Romberg's The Student Prince. At this moment, the mouth of Ellenbogen's wife, who mixed liquors at the bar, dropped completely open and her hands rose into the air. The explanation for this was in the mirror behind her. Both Sephardim were holding big guns. Out of the open mouth of Miss Ellenbogen came a scream. The music, except for the violoncello, ceased. The tall man stood up and put his hand over the barman's face. Ellenbogen himself allowed a tray of something, strudel perhaps, to tip slowly to the floor. Tartakower leaned toward the old musician. Mr. Bear, time to stop. So these are the two invaders, not Jews, as it turns out, from the island of Puerto Rico, who invade the Steinway restaurant and cause a great deal of trouble, including some deaths. At one point, the living Jews in the restaurant have to play a concert, and I'll read a very brief description of this concert and then skip to the last paragraph of this Steinway Quintet. So here are the musicians still alive, starting to play. And you get, I like this passage. It reflects, I think, my own feeling for the role of music in our lives. I cannot say how long our concert lasted. Less than 1 hour, perhaps. The light in the room soon faded completely. Between selections, no applause. Yet in the many decades of the Steinway Quintet, there had not been such music as this. I am struggling words to describe it, and I fear I shall fail in this task. Not, however, because music is, as some critics say, an abstract art. I have never believed such modern 12-tonish statements. Each note corresponds to a nuance of feeling, just as every word of a poem does, or any brushstroke of a painting. Very well. I must then simply describe what these feelings were. This is taxing, difficult. Yet my emotion that Wednesday night was not in essence, a day went by, I said it was Tuesday, a whole day went by. My emotion that Wednesday night was not in essence different from that which I regularly experience upon hearing a broadcast, perhaps of Halevi on station WQXR, only sharper. It was what we used to call Zusammengehörigkeit, a feeling of connectedness. Connectedness in the first place to the man whose music I was at that moment hearing or playing. In that final hour at the Steinway restaurant, I felt nearest, I think, during his concert suite and the score from The Life of Zola to Mr. M. Steiner. The reason for this, perhaps, is that he was Viennese and a former pupil of Mahler. Indeed, I soon felt this connection not only to the film composer, but behind him, so to speak, the whole world of the imperial city, its broad streets, its river, the K&K Hof Opern Theater, and even at light moments when I myself was executing a difficult trill, the Wienerwald, with its trees and its birds. As our program continued, this feeling of closeness, better to say an absence of division, of divisiveness, grew to include those with whom I was playing. Mermelstein, Tartakauer, Hebert, Salpeter. It was as if the Steinway Quintet were a single person giving a solo performance, as if individual threads bound us one to another, so that when Salpeter moved his arm upward, I felt myself pulled so slightly in his direction. And at last there grew to be a similar bond with those who were listening below. We could at that time hardly see them, only the shine from a pair of eyeglasses, a white shirt collar, the napkin on Margoli's arm. Like heads bobbing in an ocean of darkness. Then I felt myself to be not this Leib Goldkorn, no longer the separate citizen, but also a part of that ocean, like a grain of salt, no different from those other grains, Mosk or Ellenbogen, or the woman Hildegard Stuchkoff, or the lifeless corpse of her spouse. Yes, even, do not feel alarm at what I now say, even the two murderers, for they were part of that ocean too. That ocean, that darkness, friends. We know what it is, do we not? And this is my feeling concerning the nature of music, that it connects those who have died, Stuchkoff and Steiner, and before Steiner, Mahler, with those who are merely waiting to do so, all in a similar boat, as Americans say. And now I'll just read the very last paragraph of this story. This is my address, 122 West 80th Street, by the Avenue of Columbus. I would appreciate knowing of even the smallest position on any type of musical instrument, oboe, cornet, English horn, also the percussion group. I have not in this account attempted to hide my shortcomings, but on the contrary, to present myself as I am. You know that I drink sometimes schnapps, for example, and that I do not possess a religious temperament. Yet I am speaking truthfully when I tell you I feel myself to be now the same person who received the gift of a Rudol and Rose, my flute, many years in the past. And like that young boy, I am still filled with amazement that merely by blowing upon such an instrument and moving one's fingers, a trained person may produce such melodious, such lyrical sounds. You are no doubt aware that with a flute, the breath passes over the opening and not into a mouthpiece, as with other woodwinds. Its music, therefore, is the sound of breathing, of life. It is the most ancient of instruments, and the most basic too. A boy can make one with a knife and a hollow twig. This is what shepherds did, playing to sheep. Thank you. I think that's enough, Leib Goldkorn. for tonight. If you have any questions, I'm happy to try to respond.
Wonderful, Leslie. Thank you for that reading. It was fantastic. So we have some questions that came in before the reading, which I will get to in a moment. But there was a question that just came in during the reading, so I thought I would. It's a more maybe looking for a comment.
Does it ask why I can't sing?
Yeah. So it's from Mark Bernheim, and it says, Leslie, in today's New York Times, note a long review of a recently opened Casablanca exhibition at the New Gallery, collected by Ronald Lauder. Hundreds of artifacts and posters from the film and a discussion of it as a work on the state of refugees, adding to the significance of the 80th anniversary of the film. So I thought if you want to comment on that as it relates to...
I saw the same article in today's Times. I don't like Lauder very much because he got all those Republicans elected in New York State, thus giving the Congress to what used to be a political party. I know a lot about Casablanca, of course, because my uncle and father wrote it. And if you want, Mark Bernheim, a full answer to my feelings about Casablanca, that's what my previous book, A Hill of Beans, surely available at the Brookline Booksmith, is all about, and I urge people to read it there. But I of course still feel close to Casablanca, and the feeling of connectedness that I just read about, it connects me to my father and my uncle and my family, and so all art does what music does. It connects us.
Okay, so I will return to some earlier questions. What was the first inkling of inspiration that led you to the character of Leib Goldkorn?
Well, I discussed that in the afterward, right? That I was this young Yaley. I went into this restaurant at my uncle's bidding. The stories I tell are absolutely true. The one waiter said, "This isn't for you," and I called the other waiter over. He says, "I'm not electric." And so I had a feeling for those old guys too. And I would go back not whenever, but often when I went back to the city from New Haven, I'd go into that restaurant and have the free onion rolls. And so the inkling for Leib Goldkorn was a kind of connected feeling to those old men, whom all too soon I blinked my eyes and I'm one myself. And that's where it came from. It came from those waiters, some feeling of connectedness to them. I thought music might be the key, so I added it. Ratner's had no music at all, except when people trilling, there's a waiter over here. But I added that, and that was the inspiration.
What gives Goldkorn his irrepressible spirit? What animates his movement in his life?
What animates Goldkorn? Sex, basically. I mean,
duly noted.
Here you have it. Sex and a love for music, I think, and fellow feeling. From the cat to even his enemies, his feeling for those two Puerto Ricans who invaded the Steinway Quintet. There's no censor, no limit to where the feelings of this man end up. I think that's why I said earlier on that he's the pearl on the necklace, not these grander books about very important things. Because in the end, what's more important than depicting a man and his fellow feeling for other men?
So there's two questions here that I'm going to link them together because I think they're connected. How do love and artistic passion, or passion, walk hand in hand both in Goldkorn's stories and life? And the other question is about
The spirit of Goldkorn is
yeah.
upon us.
He would like to answer himself.
I think that's Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky, so no surprise. Should
Should I
run and
just
get
pull it
Paul
out?
to turn that off.
Pull it out? Okay, well,
Where you
hopefully that's, thank you, Goldkorn, we do
Yeah, it was the
appreciate
spirit
that.
of Goldkorn. Look,
We have to, can we take it out? Can we take this out?
wouldn't you know it? Okay.
So this Paul Epstein will pay for right here. Let's, all right,
But I
so,
mean, I think that's interesting. I mean, that was Swan Lake by Tchaikovsky, and the irrepressible spirit of music. Whenever we talk or think about Leib Goldkorn, it's not far away, and it came through the ether and broke through.
yeah.
That's called making the best of it.
No, I believe in that, I do. All right, so where I was talking about this, that how love and passion go in his life, and also the connection to Pablo Picasso, that provocative work that is the cover image. How are Picasso and Goldkorn kindred spirits? I think you just described this a bit in your early, just your
Yes,
answer
and it
gave us,
relates to the earlier question plus Picasso. Well, the answer to that is this. I mean, Picasso had a irrepressible life force in him. He's not popular now because of Me Too and what have you, but for me, his art. I mean, I feel, as I told my students this year, I feel lucky to have been alive at the same time that people like Picasso were alive. And he, for me, is the Titian of of the 20th century, of our times, or at least of my time. And that irrepressible quality of his paint. He was in 90 or so when he painted this. This is from his wonderful book called The Sketchbooks of Picasso, and and you know, it even looks like Leib Goldkorn. I knew years ago when I had the first inklings of a book, a collection of the Goldkorn tales. I had seen this painting, and I looked it back up because I felt even then, if I ever do a book uh, of all Goldkorniana, that's the cover I want for it. And of course, you know, Julie and Lisa are perhaps the only people in America who have the courage to do it. But let's see if the bookstores have the courage to put it out on the shelves. Hope so. But the spirit of Picasso, that part of the sort of erotic, um, the way he sees life erotically, that is a landscape, a still life, um, maybe even Guernica with its shrieking woman. The aura of eroticism is never far away, just as it's never far away from Leib Goldkorn. So it was easy for me to choose this cover and to know how it was linked to my character.
So this is just a spontaneous question that I'll ask myself, having not read the book, but you know, this eroticism that you're talking about now, and the, you know, lack of inhibition and this sort of the drive that, you know, we can see animates Picasso's work, certainly. How do you think of that in this age of you know, Me Too and all of the not just Me Too, it's more, I think it's more intense in that it's just we've rethought the erotic. The erotic lives in a different domain now. It's so it seems like there's so almost like two different worlds. This world that Leib inhabited, and the world that we live in today. And I wonder what you think about that in terms of eroticism. How does that, as a force, like philosophically and just in day-to-day life, have we lost the erotic? It used to be something that we all moved toward.
Well, if the harpies of Me Too, and you know, Me Too was needed in many ways, but it's so exaggerated and so out of control now, I feel, that the people who are censoring others, especially in the, you know, I cannot teach Huck Finn anymore. And we have to take sensitivity tests, and it's not that we're getting toward what the Red Guards were in China. So that's the side of Me Too and the woke culture that I think has no feeling for what art is about. What art is about, to go to your question, Lisa, is about sublimation. That is to say, art is very often, maybe always, to some degree, sexual feelings in a way that is transformed into a sort of the beautiful appreciation of life, right? And so what I said before, that the aura of eroticism is always around every work of art, I think I do believe, though it, to one degree or another, sublimated. And I think what's happening is, you said, how are we going to have any more art? Is a very good question, because look, an artist is a person and he's an artist. It doesn't matter what kind of person he was. What matters is the art. Maybe there are two or three saints in the whole history of literature, like Chekhov, who was a doctor. But Chekhov is no greater or no less an artist because he lived a saintly life. And if we only can have saints in our universities or in our culture or even in our political life, we're doomed. And our art is certainly doomed. So you have to, I mean, the most extreme example for me was Ezra Pound, who supported Mussolini and a tremendous anti-Semite, who called for the destruction of the Jews, and came back to America at the end of the war, was put in St. Elizabeth's Hospital, and then was given the Bollingen Prize for poetry. Right? The only question to ask is, did he deserve the prize as a poet? T.S. Eliot was a terrible man in many ways for some of those same reasons, though not as extreme. Was he a great poet? Yes, he was a great poet. But if we start to say we're not going to read Huckleberry Finn, perhaps our greatest novel, because we misunderstand what Twain was doing when he talks about, when he uses the N word in the novel, it's ridiculous that I have to say N word, but I do, right? If we can't teach our greatest works, people will stop creating great works. Which I think we're going far from Leib Goldkorn, but I think these are important questions. I'm glad you asked. So.
Two more questions? Okay. Let me just make sure I don't have another question in here real quick. Okay, so I have another question which I'm interested in the answer. This is an academic question. It's really more about process. Mm-hmm. You spent 36 years as the head of BU's creative writing program. Has teaching others changed, altered your craft? What have you learned from your students over these many years in terms of your own practice and your own discipline as a writer and a person who thinks about writing?
Well, it's a good question. I should have asked it of myself many times. Everybody says they learn from their students, right? It's sort of in the handbook for teachers. But I believe that I have. I'm a different teacher now than I was before. I mean, I can hear my students chortling in the background. But unlike the way I taught before, the class, I'm a little quieter in the class. I let them speak first and try and pick up what they have to say. I'm more patient, I think, than I was before, but no less demanding at the same time. Don't know what else to say, except everybody should apply to the BU fiction program and poetry. It's a wonderful, wonderful school with a wonderful program. I hope we don't change its nature, which is now in the works. It's not necessary. When I think about myself and look back over my life, what am I? Many things. A writer, yes, but maybe just as much a teacher. And I think of my students as a kind of extended family, and that the value of my life may have been expended as much in that classroom with 10 students at a time as in all the books that I've written. I'm sure maybe I would have written more, but maybe they wouldn't have been, I would like to think, as interesting, because my students have informed my life as I've gone along.
That's wonderful. think that's what we've got for questions. I think we're in good shape.
Perfect.
Is any final comments or?
Thank you for being here. I'm so sorry for those of you who had to do it twice, but I hope you feel it was worth it. I thank you, Leib Goldkorn on his cloud, playing so that only the angels can hear. Thanks you too. And good night, everybody.
Thank you everyone for joining us today. It was a privilege to have you. And if you'd like to purchase the book, you'll find the link for that right below the description of this video. It would be wonderful if you could make those purchases for Brookline Booksmith for this amazing text right here. Thanks again. Lovely to have you.
Thank you.